Hello, my name is John Snyder. Welcome to our show today on ethics. Our guest today is Robert A. Cerasoli, who's the new Inspector General of New Orleans for ethics. Welcome to our show. Professor, could you give me your definition of ethics?
Surely. Ethics, and this is my definition of ethics from a professorial point of view, an academic point of view, not for New Orleans, absolutely, because I'm really just Inspector General in New Orleans, not Inspector General for ethics. It's important to point that out. That has a specific function. But from the ethics point of view, I believe ethics are standards of conduct. That, in fact, ethics are much more distinct from morality. That there probably as many moralities running around out there as there are people in the United States or in the world. Morality is more of an individualistic kind of thing. Ethics, in fact, in order to talk about ethics, you have to come to an agreement of terms. So in order for people to come to an agreement of terms, they have to set standards by which they act accordingly. And there are different ethics in different situations. There are ethics within organizations, there are ethics within families, there are ethics within regular daily contact, there are ethics in religious organizations, there are ethics in government organizations. And depending on the sphere in which you are in is where you would find an ethics code or standards of conduct, which in fact is an ethics code.
Well, how would you then distinguish your role as an ethicist with your role as the Inspector General?
Well, my role in Inspector General is simply one in which there is a law. Now there's an ordinance in the city of New Orleans that tells me how I should act, so I have to follow that law. And I have to follow the laws of the United States and the laws of the jurisdiction of the state I'm in. So that will be basically my standards that I have to follow. Yeah.
Among the goals that you have set for yourself, I think, include seeing that money that's allocated to individuals by governmental agencies does in fact reach those individuals. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's different ways to do that. Inspector General is engaged to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse. That's the mantra of an Inspector General. And in this particular job, which is set up according to the principles and standards for offices of Inspector General, which is the Green Book, which I was a co-author of. The book specifically says that it's embedded in audit, investigations, inspections, and performance reviews.
For governmental agencies?
For the entity of which I'm presiding over, which is the City of New Orleans. Anything that's done with money from the City of New Orleans.
Where do you start with such a broad mandate?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get a picture of the government and see what the government is like. You really have to get a snapshot of the government. So you have to go in and figure out who all the players are, how the government runs, how it's supposed to run according to the law. Start by getting organization charts or creating organization charts where there are none, by finding out the names of the employees, the titles of the employees, their salaries, what functions they're supposed to perform, and actually putting it down on paper or on a computer if you'd like.
Do you have legal powers, like subpoena powers?
Yes, there are subpoena powers. I have automatic access to all the documents, so with a government agency you would hope that you wouldn't need to use subpoena powers. But if the people in the agency don't cooperate, you can use subpoena powers. You also have subpoena powers for people who are outside the government, who are doing business with the government.
Do you make periodic reports on your efforts?
Reports could come in the form of performance reviews or inspections. Investigations you wouldn't necessarily make a report on. You would either work on investigation solely, or you'd work it with another law enforcement agency. After the result of the investigation is determined, you would then allow or dish the investigation off for someone to prosecute.
I see.
Through a prosecutorial authority. But a good Inspector General puts 80% of their work in prevention as opposed to detection. Detection is very labor intensive. You spend a lot of money. It takes a long time to package a case for prosecution, anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on having a prosecutor who's willing, who's motivated. And so you get much more of a bang out of prevention, because prevention involves education. Prevention involves setting up systems by which that people will not repeat corrupt acts or repeat inefficient, ineffective, unproductive acts. A lot of what the IG does is about setting up systems of how to do proper business of government.
Are some of the lapses just a question of people not knowing the rules?
It's across the spectrum. There's a lot of people don't know the rules. They could be negligent. They could just be abusive. They could be wasteful. There are many elements involved, and oftentimes they could be intention. But I find that there's many more times where it's just a lapse of judgment or an avoidance of following a specific rule rather than some intent.
Hmm. You know. So then your main focus will be setting up standards and goals and procedures and really a structure for people to examine their conduct who are in government.
Right. Yeah. But it would be more geared toward financial, the financial aspect of the government, not to their behavior per se. The Inspector General is all about making the government more efficient, more effective, and more productive. Those are very important words. And in order to do that, oftentimes you can't just whack people over the head with a stick. You have to really explain to them how business should be done.
Is this a growing trend in this country to have, for municipalities to have inspector generals?
Yes, the inspector general concept, the first inspector general concept in this country came in the colonial army. It was actually a German, Baron von Steuben was the first inspector general of the colonial army during the Revolutionary War. There have always been inspector generals in the armed services, but back in 1976, there were a number of people, a gentleman named Marvin Doyle, who worked for with Jack Brooks, a congressman from Texas, and Senator Lawton Childs of Florida. They put the first inspector general in HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare, to deal with the welfare problems that were going on in the United States at the time. Then in 1980, when Reagan came in, he put inspector generals, about 60 inspector generals in the federal government. But also in 1980, an inspector general was created. The first inspector general outside the national government was created in Massachusetts. And that was probably one of the stronger inspector generals ever to be instituted in the United States. After that time, the state of New York created one, the state of Ohio created one, the state of Virginia created a limited one, and there was one other one created, and my memory's lapsing now, but there were 5 created outside in the state jurisdictions. As years went on, another 40 were created in the federal government, and now we have it, it's probably another 483 outside the federal government, which are in states, municipalities, agencies of municipalities. For instance, Chicago has an inspector general for the city, similar to what New Orleans has. They have an inspector general in the transit authority. They have an inspector general in the school board. They have an inspector general in the housing authority. So there's a trend in many municipalities to put them in different agencies.
I see.
Yeah.
Are these people generally welcomed with open arms, or are they looked at?
No, not at all. They're very, first of all, people look askance and they say, well, they look with suspicion. They really don't want to welcome the inspector general in. Many people are afraid that they're going to be caught doing something wrong, when in fact they may not be doing anything wrong. It just may be a fear that they have. So the inspector generals usually aren't welcomed. Once the inspector general does something positive, creates a new system, creates a new revenue generating system, gets money to people that should be getting the money from the government but can't, the most needy citizens, because corruption affects the poor more than anyone else. And it's hard to convince people who require services from the government that the money might be going someplace else and not getting to them. And that's important. But the concept has grown. As a matter of fact, the state of Florida has really enhanced the concept. There are about 88 inspector generals in the state of Florida. Each state agency has an inspector general, and then they have a chief inspector general for the state of Florida.
Do you see changes and positive results from the work of these people?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. There's very positive results. Inspector General serves a very specific function. The Inspector General sort of operates in that middle ground between an auditor and a prosecutor. Inspector General takes in all the other things. Inspector General wants to see the government operate properly and moves to try and get that done. In Massachusetts, where I was Inspector General for 10 years, we had a legislative function. I didn't have jurisdiction over the legislature. And there was a specific reason for that, because I had to go to the legislature to get my budget. And in most cases in the United States, according to constitutions of the federal government and the state governments, legislative bodies are the judges of their own members. And they usually have internal ethics committees. But in Massachusetts, I had an actual legislative function, so when I saw a problem and I suggested that the problem be corrected, I could then put my suggestions into legislation, proposed legislation, to be enacted into law. The legislature would have to take those suggestions up and debate them one way or the other, up or down, so they couldn't be avoided. So that's a really good function for an Inspector General. Here in New Orleans, I have the ability to make suggestions to the City Council for legislation, but they don't have to take those suggestions.
I see. So you can legislate ethical conduct?
Yeah, I could, yes. Yeah. It's more not legislating ethical conduct. It's actually putting in internal controls, putting in systems where they're just wise systems for the government to do business, to prevent the waste of money.
Do you think there's a certain cynicism that may attach to the opposition to inspectors general? I mean, do people want this?
Oh yeah, there's cynicism on both sides. The people that want it and the people who don't want it. You know, it's all how an Inspector General is judged. You know, how do you judge the effectiveness of an Inspector General? How much money do I recover for the citizens of the city of New Orleans? How many people do you put in jail? How many reports do you do? How do you justify your office? This is something that exists in all Inspector General venues. How do you decide if the Inspector General has done the job, has produced what they say they're going to produce? So, you know, we put a lot of mechanisms in place to try and allow that judgment to occur. You know, annual reports, published reports, lists of things that we're working on, things that we've done, cases open, cases closed. These are all benchmarks of how the IG might perform. But in all, it will be, you know, how the government changes in the long run.
Mm-hmm. You know. Do you expect that your efforts will have an immediate effect?
That's difficult to say. You know, I could get lucky and have an immediate effect. I could run into some really good things that, you know, in the best of worlds, it'd be great for me to find a problem that I foresee or that exists and get everyone to come to an agreement that the policy should be changed to do it the right way, and that the city would make a lot of money from that suggestion. That would be great. That would be a home run. I'd look great, and maybe it would encourage people to put more confidence into the office. But I think that, you know, it's like anything else that gets started. You know, it's going to be difficult, I think, in the beginning.
You know, it's always been said that New Orleans is particularly challenged in this respect. Do you think that's true?
I think, yeah, I've done this work in many different venues. I, you know, advocate for the Inspector General concept on behalf of the federal government, on behalf of the State Department. And one of my areas of expertise is French West Africa. And, you know, this kind of effort is encouraged all over the world. I mean, we encourage this effort everywhere. I believe in the Inspector General concept. It's something I've pushed. It's something I've been involved in writing groundbreaking standards for. You know, I really initially was not interested in this job at all. As a matter of fact, there were people from, you know, I applied for the job, I interviewed for the job, I got the job, I didn't know anybody here. People in other parts of the United States and the Inspector General community suggested I should apply for the job. I did so reluctantly. But if anyone can, you know, if we can make an Inspector General survive here, and this goes to your original question, then we can make an Inspector General survive anywhere. And the most important accomplishment of an Inspector General is survival of the office, that it goes on and it thrives and it provides guidance and effective work for the jurisdiction that it's in. So the direct answer to your question, yeah, I really have not seen another jurisdiction like this any place in the United States.
But it's a challenge for you, so you're
Yes.
willing to undertake it. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
I've always thought that ethics almost being a part of being human. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that, if you look at the history of ethics, there's a survey done each year in the United States by the Lutheran Brotherhood, which is a religious organization. And they like to find out how people are thinking about specific ideological issues, particularly religious issues, but also philosophical issues. And every year in the United States, they ask the question, do you believe there are any absolute standards of right and wrong? And the percentage of the answers to that question have been going up each year. And 79% of the people in the United States last year answered that they do not believe there are any absolute standards of right and wrong. That each situation is determined according to the circumstances.
Really?
Yes. And this is what we know as ethical relativism. And for those of us who teach ethics, there are those in the ethics field who deny that ethical relativism even exists. They don't even want to recognize it as a part of the philosophical aspects of ethics. And I say to them, including people who I've had the argument with, who are professors of mine at Harvard University, John Rawls, who's one of the foremost ethicists, God bless his soul, he's deceased now, but they believe that ethics are some kind of internal thing that operates inside you. And he believed in the veil of ignorance, that everyone had this innocence that they dealt with. But I really do believe, because we can't really come to an agreement, as I said earlier, in terms, I think that, in fact, we have to have standards of conduct and call them ethics codes for us to maneuver in the spheres in which we operate. I've sat on many ethics committees, and one of the problems with ethics codes is that ethics codes can be aspirational. And when they're strictly aspirational, they're hard to enforce because they're loaded with value-laden terms such as integrity, honesty, justice, goodness, right, wrong, evil. These are all value-laden terms which are defined by the individual. It's very, very difficult to enforce an aspirational code. For instance, I remember sitting on the ethics committee of the Association of Government Accountants, and their code used to have a provision in it that we rewrote the code, but their code used to have a provision in it that said, don't do anything that will bring disrepute to the accounting profession. Well, that's all well and good, but if someone walked into your bedroom on a Saturday night, is what you're doing in your bedroom have anything to do with being an accountant and bringing disrepute to the accounting profession? So, you really have to write a code that says anything I do as an accountant that brings disrepute to the accounting profession is certainly much more enforceable and adaptable than something that someone would do outside of that category. Certainly, if you were convicted of a felony or you did something that was against the laws of the country, that again would be something that might be considered. But you can build that into the code. You could say that if you were convicted of a felony, you should no longer be an accountant, you see. So ethics codes are funny things. People want to use them as shields, but oftentimes they're hard to enforce.
Well, it seems like that ethical responsibilities transcend legal responsibilities. Would you say that's true?
I don't necessarily. Sometimes that's a hazy area. You can have, actually you could do something that's ethical and disobey the law, and you can do something that's unethical and obey the law. I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. I think that that the law operates and the law is the law, and that we all have to obey the law. But ethics codes are usually things that are put on top of the law that you have to follow the law and you have to follow this code.
I see. So what would be the first rule of ethical conduct for a governmental official in your estimation?
Well, you know, I think that all depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. I don't believe in absolutes.
Oh.
I think you have to look at the law of the jurisdiction you're in.
I see.
I think that you know, the laws are different in different jurisdictions. I guess if you were going to ask me that question and I had to answer it, I would say obeying the law. But you know, then again, if you look at the United States, the way the law is laid, you have the Constitution, which is the law of the land. You have Supreme Court cases, which are interpretations of the Constitution, which are the level below that. Then you have federal law, both criminal and civil. Then you have the state constitution. Then you have state law, civil and criminal. You also have, you know, federal rules and regulations. You also have state rules and regulations. Then you have municipal law and municipal constitutions, charters. So you have these many layers of law, all of which you have to obey in a specific jurisdiction. Ethics codes only come in at the last level of that.
Wow. Well, that's a lot to know. So the ethical responsibility for a governmental official in this city is to obey the law.
Yes.
What about tell the truth, be honest?
Well, you know, that's interesting. There are 5 definitions of truth. I don't know, philosophically, a lot of people don't know this. As a matter of fact, you know, there's the pragmatic theory of truth, which everyone originally gets their view of the truth. There's the correspondence theory of the truth, the coherence theory of the truth, and the semantic theory of the truth. And even when juries are impaneled, juries are told to find the truth. But in most jury brochures that I've seen in state and federal jurisdictions, the truth is never defined. As a matter of fact, the truth is only gathered by finding out facts. And the juries are deciders of fact. And in fact, judges and certain appeals courts are deciders of law. So that initially when a case is decided on the basis of the facts never change. And once the case is decided, that's the facts in the case. Most cases that are appealed are overturned. Most jury decisions that are appealed and overturned are overturned on the basis of law, not on the basis of facts. So truth is a funny kind of thing. It's, you know, it's sort of like ethical relativism. You know, whose truth through whose eyes? You know, I think when Einstein invented, or I guess he invented, but maybe articulated would probably be the best word, because there's probably people who still don't believe it. But when he articulated the theory of relativity, that light traveled at 186,200 feet per second, I guess he really, you know, put the finishing touches on the idea that, you know, we would all see things the same way. I mean, it's absolutely impossible for someone to see things through the same way, through the same filter. If you look at philosophy and the way ethics is, you know, there are 4 areas of philosophy. Most philosophers or academicians would agree that philosophy is broken down into logic, which we all know is the syllogistic part, epistemology, metaphysics, and then ethics. And, you know...
well, that right there is fascinating. First of all, what is philosophy?
Philosophy is the study of the most important questions of mankind, of the human mind, spirit, you know, how we approach things, how we, you know, do things, the important questions of the very things we're talking about. What is justice? What is right? What is wrong? It's not a pragmatic science, as people would call mathematics, or some people would call it's not a provable science, but it is a part of the humanities, you know, part of what we would decide. You know, a lot of people say that, and I tend to agree in some pieces of it, that a lot of the things that were articulated by Plato and Aristotle are definitive in certain ways, you know, that you can't change some of the things they said.
So the areas that you mentioned, logic is the ability to think rationally and reasonably. How would you define these areas?
Well, logic is certainly, it's the ability to think in a I never want to use, one of my teachers said you never use a definition to do a definition, right? It's a very specific way to think, to put together reasoning. It's based on mathematics. You know, epistemology is just, for those who would watch this, and without getting into a real detailed explanation, the simple one-word answer to epistemology is knowledge. This is the knowledge that we all possess. It's the knowledge we've all gained through our lives, sitting on our parents' knees, you know, going to school, being taught by our teachers, whatever religion we belong to, maybe listening to those theories. It's what we bring to this table right here and right now.
So the study of that would be how this knowledge comes about.
Correct. Metaphysics is simply our concept of reality and how we filter all this knowledge and how we filter this ethics thing that we're talking about, because ethics is the fourth piece of that. And our reality is basically how we approach the day, how we analyze all this, how we filter it. It basically has a lot to do with Einstein's theory of relativity. I don't think we're advanced far enough yet that you know, we've discovered all the means of communication. I think that as we move on, and maybe not us in our lifetime, but as people who come after us move on, they will find other dimensions, they will find other methods of communication. I assume, and I'm not saying this in a predictive way, but I assume that someday that people will probably not communicate by speech anymore. They'll probably be able to communicate just by, you know, getting control of their mind waves. I mean, obviously there are other realms of communication. I mean, we discover this all the time. I mean, if we sat down 100 years ago and told the people that were on Earth at the time that we were going to be communicating through these little boxes that we carry in our hand, and the voice was going to be going through the air, they'd say, I absolutely don't believe that. I mean, even if you had told Marconi when he invented, you know, the wireless, he might not believe it could be developed to that extent, but who knows? I don't know.
Well, so there's very much of a philosophical foundation for your work. Do you have to be a philosopher to be an ethicist, to be an inspector general?
No, not at all. That's just something that I have a particular interest in, and I've always had an interest in since many, many years ago, for 30 years. I wrote the original ethics law in Massachusetts in 1977.
I read that.
Yeah, I served on as chairman of the House Ethics Committee in Massachusetts House of Representatives for 5 years, and then.
You were a young man when you did that.
Yeah, very young. I was. I have to tell you that I was probably when I wrote that law, probably around 29.
How did you come to such a, maybe if I might say, a wise view of human conduct at such a young age?
Oh.
Good teachers?
I think it had a lot to do with my epistemology and my metaphysics. I think, you know, of course, you know, all the knowledge that I gained, how I was schooled, how I was trained, how I was taught by my parents, the times, you know, what was going on in the times. You know, when I might have had this training, but in 1976, when I first developed the idea to create an ethics law in Massachusetts, Watergate was on the minds of the people of the country. And in Massachusetts, there was a corruption scandal called the MBM scandal. It's an acronym for a construction company. And that scandal was going on. And the legislature did not have any ethics committees. They didn't even have any way to deal with the scandal. A crime commission was impaneled that was headed by John William Ward. He was president of Amherst University. And it was called the Ward Commission. It was named after him. And so they started to look at the way this particular corruption scandal went down in Massachusetts, and they decided to create systems by which to deal with it. And one of the results of that report was the creation of the Inspector General and the creation of agencies to deal with construction in Massachusetts. Just the flavor of the times and what was going on. I had previously worked as an aide in the Senate and had worked on campaign finance reform. And then when I was when I was a legislator, I actually was a co-author of specific bills for campaign finance reform. When I entered the legislature when I entered the legislature as an aide in 1972, there basically were no laws on how you would give people money for campaigns. I mean, you could give people cash. They could use it for anything, not necessarily for their campaign. I mean, you know, that as long as it wasn't a bribe under the bribery laws. And, also, there was this existing ethics law in Massachusetts. They called it a conflict of interest law. It wasn't called an ethics law. It was called conflict of interest law. It was Chapter 268A. And between 1947 and 1977, for 30 years, there was never a criminal enforcement under the law, because there was a lack of willpower on the part of prosecutorial authorities to enforce the law. So I came up with the thought of, since there was no willpower to enforce the law criminally, I thought of why not make it a civil law and attach monetary penalties to it. Maybe make people lose their jobs, maybe you know, let the public know that someone might have done something wrong, but you know, was intentionally and not intentionally, depending how it was disposed. The law suggested creation of a state ethics commission, financial disclosure for elected and appointed officials, and a mechanism by which they could report conflicts before they happened, you know.
So these are very specific things, and when you write a code of ethics for governmental action, you're not writing generalities.
No. These are specific things that I had thought long and hard about that came out of my head in terms of how people might act in the government. You know, I put something in there that was very novel, and in the course of my work, I've never had time to study it or investigate it, but I have a hunch, and it's only a hunch, it may not be correct, that I was the first person to put the appearance of conflict in an ethics law in the United States. But I've never been able to, I just haven't had time to do the research. But back in '76, when I wrote the first law, by the way, didn't get off. It was a non-starter. It didn't. I filed it myself in the legislature, so it was a non-starter. And then Common Cause of Massachusetts came to me, a gentleman named Jay Headland, who was the executive director at the time. And he says, you know, why don't we get together? He says, we'd like to do an ethics law too. He said, let's take your law and let's sit down and rewrite it and go out and get 80,000 signatures, put it on the ballot. He said, because the legislature's not going to pass it. I said, wow, that's an amazing idea. And I said, it's going to be a lot of work. And he says, yes, it's a lot of work. He says, but if we get it on the ballot, qualified for the ballot, then the legislature might take it up, because after we got the 80,000, once it was qualified for the ballot, we would then have to go out and get another 40,000 signatures. So it worked, the plan worked, and the legislature took it up. And I was a sitting legislator at the time, and I sat on the conference committee that was the compromise committee to determine how the law would read. And so this appearance of a conflict thing was put in there, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting piece of the pie. A lot of laws don't have it. You know, if you think there's going to be, sometimes the actual conflict is just as bad as the appearance of a conflict. So we put a provision in there that if someone thought there was going to be an appearance of a conflict, that they could articulate that to a commission, so that they could let them know, I'm telling you right up front, this is the situation.
So you would hope that some of the governmental officials in this city would come to you with a question and say, is this appropriate?
Yes. This is a absolute essential function of the IG, that hopefully at some point when the IG is trusted, people would come and say, you know, just want to ask you, I was asked to do something, I was told to do something. Is this the right way to do it? How do we get some guidance? Yeah.
Well, how do you bridge the gap between elected officials who are theoretically servants of the people who become elected officials and then develop a certain self-serving approach to that opportunity. You can't really legislate that, right?
Well, if people, the government laws provide for using government funds for government services. If someone runs afoul of the law, there are provisions to investigate, look at, and see that those people are punished. The key is that that occurs. Now, oftentimes, no, I won't say oftentimes, many times you might not find that. It might be retrospective. You might be down the road 2 years before you see anything like that. That may manifest itself in a failed system, a bloated contract, bad construction. It could occur in many different ways. And when you look at that, you then say, gee, why did that happen? And you know, a good IG works on the deductive method of reasoning as opposed to the inductive method of reasoning. And that's important.
Could you explain that?
Yeah. Inductive method of reasoning is clearly, for those people who maybe took chemistry or biology in high school, you go into a lab and you develop a hypothesis of how a chemical reaction might work, and you develop your hypothesis and you test a series of chemicals to see if in fact your hypothesis rings true or not. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to prove your hypothesis. So you're already going into the experiment with a bias. Now, most scientists would say, no, that's not true because we'll just develop more and more hypotheses. But for people who investigate crimes, they never get off the first hunch. They never get off the first hypothesis. Inspector generals use the deductive method of reasoning. The deductive method of reasoning would be more, it would probably be exemplified best by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle when he wrote the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. And one of his famous quotes is, whenever you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And that's how an inspector general works. An inspector general could investigate an issue for 2 years. And if he finds exculpatory evidence that disproves the investigation, then he has to bring that forward at all costs and disband the investigation or move it in another direction, because that is the hallmark of an inspector general. Many crime scenes in the United States are destroyed because police have developed a theory, followed the theory, to the exclusion of all other important evidence. And if they had taken into consideration all the evidence, the consideration of that evidence might have led them down another path. But because they had invested their mind and their effort into a specific theory, they are reluctant to relinquish that theory.
Right. Well, how do you separate unethical conduct from unethical people? Are you looking to ferret out the conduct or the people?
It's strictly according to the codes that are set up, the laws that are set up. They're, you know.
And that regulates the conduct.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you know, you could say that let's take this for instance. Blatantly, we probably both agree that if an axe was in a hardware store in New Orleans and the store was closed, that you could not go into the store and steal the axe without violating the law. Correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. It's a slam dunk. It's theft. But let's say that Katrina happened and there was a store and it had an axe in it and Mrs. Jones was across the street and she was stuck in her second, floor bedroom trying to get up through the roof, and someone had a boat and they got the axe and they were going to go over there and try and use that axe to chop through the ceiling. I don't think there would be anyone that would say that that would be an ethical violation. Technically, by stealing the axe, it is an illegal act. But whether that store or the police at some point would come forward after Mrs. Jones' life was saved is probably, you could probably answer that question.
So you're
So
saying,
you can see that it's not always clear what's ethical and what's legal.
so there may be exceptions
Yeah.
even to the rules that you are instigating.
There could, there could be. I haven't.
You can't think of everything.
Can't think of everything, and that's clear. You cannot think of everything, and you cannot put your hands on everything. That's why you try not to make ethical rules that can't be enforced.
Are the rules that you're dealing with and that you're making, are they visible to us all as citizens? Where do we go to see?
Oh yeah, the statute that exists, the ordinance that exists, sets up the Inspector General's office as part of the public code of New Orleans. Yeah.
Do you put these kind of things on a website, or do we have to go to a law
They would
library?
be in Muni code. Yeah, it would be in Muni code for the city of New Orleans.
So how are you going to, are you just going to reference these statutes to the people that you're trying to oversee?
Yeah.
You don't send them emails or memos or handbooks, or
Yeah. Well,
you remind them of the statutes?
we would hope to get into a situation in New Orleans where we do classes, education classes to help people understand what we do and not make them afraid of the IG and welcome the IG in and help the IG help them solve some problems.
Well, an ethical person could commit an unethical act unintentionally,
It's possible. Yeah.
and so really you're more concerned about the action than the person. You want to make sure that the action is ethical as it relates to the citizens of this city.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at law and you look at criminal law, I mean, one of the biggest pieces of criminal law is intent. One of that would be a felony. One of the biggest pieces of misdemeanors are negligence, failure to perform an act, failure to do something. Fraud is fraud. That involves intent. Waste involves negligence. Abuse is something that may or may not be illegal. In many cases, it's not illegal. It's what a lot of people would think waste would be, but in fact, it is what we call abuse. And it happens everywhere. It's at different levels. Sometimes it's gone after. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes to go after it costs too much money to just you try and ferret it out. You try and put standards up by which you say you don't do this. I mean, a simple example would be someone who's working in an office. It doesn't even have to be a public office, but they go to work for a company, a private company, and the private company has standards. Don't use the telephone to call your house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who hasn't called their home from, an office telephone? I don't think the company's going to pursue it. I don't think anybody else is going to pursue it. So now what happens if you ratchet it up a notch and you make a long-distance phone call? Is someone going to pursue a long-distance phone call in the company? Maybe not, but if the company is monitoring your phone, they may bill you $1.25, $1.50, whatever the call costs. Although a lot of companies now have lines that are just dedicated to long distance. But ratchet it up another notch of you making 25 long distance calls a day, and the bill becomes $500 a month. Now is the company going to go after you? Yeah, because now it's something they consider serious money. So you see, it's interesting how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And it all depends on how much this company would want to invest in the technology to monitor this, because it takes a lot of work.
Well, in your work, you're obviously going to be dealing with all the city agencies.
Yes.
Is that one code of ethics for all of them, or does it fit the particular agency?
Well, no, I don't make the code of ethics.
It's in the statutes.
There's this code of ethics for the state, but there is no code of ethics right now, basically, for the city. That's going to be up to the Ethics Review Board to make if they take that charge.
What kind of thing would be included in that? Can you tell me specifically?
That's not going to be for me to make. I haven't conceptualized that. I mean, they may ask me for my thoughts on it, but I really haven't looked at this, looked at the current situation in the city hard enough as to juxtapose that against the state law as to what would have to be in any kind of city law. Whatever would be in a city law would be over and above the state law. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've seen already in the laws of Louisiana, there's law upon law, lay it upon law. It's just a lot of law, and you really don't want to confuse situations either. You don't want to make so much law that it's just a myriad of laws that can't be enforced. You really want, what you really want to do here is you want to create something that people are going to follow. Right. You don't, as I said before, you don't want something that's just aspirational. Right. You want something that's clear, that's precise, that people can understand, that they're not afraid of, and that they agree with. And I think that's important.
But they're usually very specific things. It's not like do the right thing.
Yeah, it's usually very specific things, yeah.
But
the laws that exist now basically cover most of this.
Can you give me an example of conduct that you saw occurring in New Orleans that you would hope would cease to occur with your presence on the scene?
Well, I really haven't analyzed. I'm gathering information in New Orleans. I'm not prepared to say that any particular conduct that I have seen is indicative of a pattern or, something that I could make a rule for.
What makes you think we have a problem then? I mean, something has occurred to indicate that we have this.
Why do I think there's a problem? Well, let's put it this way. First of all, I'm not the one initially that said,
we have a problem.
You have a problem. I mean, there was, a charter was amended, an ethics review board was put in place, a national search went on. I applied, and I took the job. So then this is very, very crucial point, because people think that I'm the one that's here saying New Orleans has a problem, and that I'm a harbinger of something. I'm an inspector general. I do what inspector generals do. I think there are specific problems here, but I never at once said I'm the one who decided that New Orleans has a problem. I was tasked to do a job. Do I think that problems exist in the way the government does business? From what I've been able to see so far, there are problems. How do I characterize those problems? I'm going to take my time to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm not prepared to write a report and say, this is a pattern that exists throughout the government, and it has developed. In all fairness, I need time to do that.
I would imagine that there's a certain lack of organization in a number of governmental efforts as a result of this influx of cash from the federal government, from the state. So this lack of organization might actually be creating some conflicts with the statutes. Is that your job too, to kind of clarify that?
Well, no, not really. I mean, there's a lot of federal money coming in here. There's a lot of money from other sources coming in. People will come forward to me and say, where is the money going? Can you track the money for us? In certain circumstances, I may or may not be able to do that. It depends how far the horse is out of the barn. It doesn't serve any purpose for me to come in here and look at things that occurred more than 6 years ago. That's beyond the statute of limitations. But even to look at things 5 or 6 years ago, I really don't think serves my purpose. I want people to change the way they're behaving now. So I'd like to look at things that are happening within the current time, things that maybe happened in the last 2 years. I might, look at. I'm not ruling anything out, but I think it's important to try and change some of the systems that exist now, not systems that existed 6 years ago that may not even exist now. They may or may not, but I will find that out in the course of my looking. But I think it's important to be timely. Timely intervention, dissemination of lessons learned. I think that's key.
What should someone do once they have been caught in an ethical conundrum and they've made a bad choice, an illegal choice? Do they come clean? How do you handle that?
Well, that's, there are provisions already in the state law for people to handle that. I mean, they can come forward to law enforcement agencies. They can, try and mitigate their circumstances. I mean, there are provisions for all that to occur.
But it's basically a personal decision whether or not you apologize.
Correct.
And express your contrition and maybe act on that expression as well.
Yeah, that's all a different thing. That's
You're not involved in that.
Yeah.
So you're not really trying to be a prosecutor or a policeman.
No.
You're basically just trying to help governmental agencies work at a more efficient level.
That's right.
A level that is maybe clear on the ethical obligations of those officials and the responsibilities of those agencies.
Right.
So it's you're here to help. You're not here to throw somebody in jail.
That's not my specific purpose. No.
Well, that's that may come as a relief to some of us. In the community, everyone in the community has their ethical obligations to the members of that community. And are you going to try to address that as a philosophical basis for community action, or is your job more limited and more targeted?
Oh, I think the community here is very active, and I think they're very aware of using their energy to get an inspector general to do things of that nature. I don't think I have to direct them at all. I think they are fully aware of what they want to do and the ability that they have to carry out community action to get things done. I think that for whatever reason, whether it was created by the storm or the after effects of the storm, I do believe there's a very active, involved community.
Okay, well then as far as I'm thinking about your staff and your staff of auditors, you'll be auditing governmental agencies in the city just to determine if their procedures are in fact consistent with the statutes?
Well, auditing is an interesting word because we're not going to be doing financial audits. Most of these agencies already have their financial audits done. We will be doing performance audits or performance reviews.
I see.
It's a tool of the Inspector General. We're not going to be doing financial audits. We're not going to be balancing books.
Well, it sounds like performance audits would be more difficult to do.
Performance audits are more difficult to do when you actually use financial audits to work off of when you do them.
Are there performance measures that are built into governmental agencies?
Here, no.
Is that one of your tasks?
It's something that we could do, yeah.
So you have to have some way of measuring the...
Yeah, but I can't, I can put in as many performance measures as I want, but if they're not followed or adopted and you don't get agreement, then they're irrelevant. We will use measures to look at the agencies, but it'll be more looking at is the agency operating according to the law.
So you're an advisory agency, and if you uncover corruption, then you report that to the district attorney.
Yes, and the U.S. attorney.
And they proceed at their as they choose.
Right.
I see. Well, I hope that that you have cooperation in that respect, and I wish you luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here.
Okay.
I'm John Snyder. Thank you for joining us. Good day.